Then you gonna introduce me, or will we just start?
Yeah, I'll introduce
You
you.
used a pretty big intro, so what do we got?
Yeah, well, this won't be one of
Let's
those.
see what you got. This won't be one of those. This will be more realistic.
Oh, just kidding. Everybody, welcome to The Giant and the Plant, episode 1. This is the round room interview with our special guest, Cactus Moser. Of
Underlining special.
Yeah, well,
To be determined.
yeah, to be determined on that. I think we have a good interview today.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people know you, but maybe some of the questions we have, I think there'll be some new findings, some discoveries.
I'm nervous about some of these questions.
Well, just to kind of get us started off here, we'll go ahead and just ask you tell us where you're from.
Mm-hmm.
Let us know a little bit about your childhood for those who may not know.
Okay. Well, I was raised in Colorado. Still one of my favorite places. Kind of the western part of Colorado, a town called Montrose, which is near Telluride, which is now the most famous, probably, Colorado town besides Denver. But so raised there on a ranch, cattle ranch. Lived out there for all my youth, as in youth up till about junior high. But still lived on a ranch, kind of with my dad herding cattle and watching over, learning to drive a pickup at 7 years old or something, and go out and feed cows and jump up in the back of a pickup and let it drive itself and push hay off or feed. But yeah, so Colorado, ranching, moved to Denver, like junior high,
Okay.
high school, parents moved there.
Like big city, is this like a big difference here? So
Big difference. I was not at all intrigued by the big city at that point in time. I actually stayed with my grandmother for a whole school year because I didn't want to move. And my parents were getting their footing anyway, and I thought, well, this will be good. I'll escape and live in the country, and they can go live in the big city, and I'll see them on holidays. But of course, that was not in the plan, as I learned. And thankfully, years later, I saw that was better. But so when they moved, it was definitely into the kind of suburb, but of the big beast, Denver. It was Aurora, Colorado, so just the east side of Denver.
Okay. And then up until that lasted till you were in high school, or you graduated, and then...
Went to high school there. Yeah, started my musical adventures playing in bands there. Basically, when I first got to Denver, almost I started. Parents had a friend. My mother had a friend that was a singer. Well, I guess my mother and dad. There was a couple they would go bowling with. They had a basement that had a little stage of all the kind of crazy things, a little bar, a little stage. And they had, ironically, 2 high school daughters. And there was a drum set on the stage. And now I had played guitar, started guitar when I was on the ranch, and played it enough to kind of really want to play it. But then I had a teacher that was showing me, teaching me from a book, which I wish I would have stuck with. But at that point in time, I wanted to be playing chords. And as soon as I realized I was playing ding, 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 ding,
Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
there, bingo. As soon as I had that realization, I'm like, no, I'm done. I'm not doing this to play Twinkle, Twinkle. And that was when I was pretty little.
These bands you were in around that time, what kind of music were you guys playing?
Well, that by high school or junior high, it was, oh my God, it would be, okay, can you come over on Friday night, bring your amp, I got this bass player, he's coming over. Well, I'll be in my bedroom. I'm sure there's structural damage that was done by a 3-piece band of hoodlums. And at that age, all we thought that mattered was really kind of how loud it could be. Mm-hmm. And so we would kind of make up songs.
It seems that never changed.
It depends on who you ask. I'm sure that's true. The reality was and I look back thinking, man, I wish, I wish I would have understood that better then, songwriting, than I, learned later. But it was kind of cool because you would just, somebody'd go, here's a riff, dun, 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 whatever. I guess that sounds like some funk hit. We should have probably written that. But we would just play stuff, make it up. Now, once in a while, somebody would know there was a song, and it still is a song called House of the Rising Sun, classic, from everybody from the Animals to Tom Petty and going forward have all done it. But it was every guitar player had to know it. So we'd play a few of those. There's a song called Rock Me Baby. I remember I fired one guitar player from my bedroom sessions and hired another because he had a killer amp. He had a Super Beetle, which was this big, huge, oh my God, louder than the last guy's amp. And he knew Rock Me Baby. So he was in, and he also had a polka dot shirt. So there you go. That guy wins.
Yeah, looks were a big part of rock and roll, so I understand that.
Exactly.
So you said that was in Denver in high school times, and then eventually you moved out to California.
Mm-hmm. No, the Denver thing was high school, mid-'70s, during the kind of heyday of, what was the coming of age of really the rock and roll music business. Still music I listened to half the time probably from that time frame, but started playing in high school bands. We would play all the high school dances and, things around that you could do when you were in junior high, and then in high school, we would do all that. When I got out of high school, I was still going to college in Denver, but I knew there was a huge music capital kind of scene in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay.
All these huge bands were Elton John, The Who. There were
College town. Too.
Yeah, college town. CU Boulder was, and it was still, I cannot fathom that. So I got into a band up there when I was going to say, and you could play 5-6 nights a week in Boulder and never leave the town and play original music. I started playing in this band that we wrote everything and would play 5 nights a week and just go to another bar in the same town and play, and it would be packed. And that was amazing. But that was my pre-LA life. The band I was in there, we got a record deal offer, several of them. Would start going to LA and playing out there and doing showcases and going and meeting with labels and all that.
So that's what helped inspire you to want to move to LA, or
well, and I was already seeing that to have a career as a musician was not just the chances of becoming, even if you got a record deal, even by that point in time, it didn't mean you were going to be a rock star. It didn't mean you were going to be financially set. It just meant, you got a record deal. And as I realized that more clearly, kind of thankfully, most of my friends all thought you'd be a rock star and you just live like that.
I think most people still assume that.
Yeah, they probably do. And when I saw, because of going at a young age to LA, and I started seeing these session players and I was getting into these records that the same 15 or 20 drummers and guitar players and bass players were all kind of playing on this music. And I thought, I want to be part of that. So I started really looking at and understanding the musician side of it as opposed to just be in a band or be an artist or all that. And I guess I do kind of go backward. I did write songs for some of those other bands, and I thought, but I didn't see the value in that as much as I saw just playing. So, but yeah, starting to do that and go out there, I realized I got to get to this town. This is where it's really happening. You can be a big fish. I was starting to do more session work in Colorado and Denver and playing on a lot of stuff, but I knew it wasn't the real big time.
What was the time period? Like from the time that you moved to LA to the time that you left, like what time period was that? Mid-'80s?
I was the beginning of the 80s till the beginning of the 90s. I was really there off and on for 14 years, but I probably only lived there for 11 of those or 12, but I would go and spend extended times out there. And I had all these friends. I was starting to have a lot of friendships there. So when I'd go, I'd go work with people out there or stay with somebody that I knew. And just my real goal was just keep meeting people. So when I get here, I'm not just a stranger walking into town and, looking for a restaurant gig.
Right. And then, so it was the 80s in which we were in California. And at that point, I'm assuming, and that I'm correct, that you had some success. Your name was at least in some circles to where you were working in studios and doing stuff like that, or sessions or whatever, or even just like what's it called? like rehearsal band, like that kind of stuff. What was that like in the 80s in that kind of atmosphere of LA?
Mm-hmm. Well, the greatest thing that happened, almost to be frank, was that, and if I'm Frank, you can be Dave, but the thing that I found that happened was the last session, and I don't know if I've ever thought about this even before now. The very last session I did in Denver was for what was then this, I had no clue what this even was. He was a contemporary Christian rock and roll artist named Steve Taylor. And he was very much the Clash were happening. He was kind of like the Clash, and he was kind of like Devo, and Devo was a big band at that point in time. And he was a product of new wave and of the post-punk kind of music. And I played on his first EP, not knowing that that's even what was going on. I was so confused, like Christian music. So Steve Taylor's record happens, and he was a groundbreaking artist in that world. And ironically, his producer, who had come to Colorado, and I was already packing my house up and preparing to move, and he was there and said, "What are you doing here?" And to which I was like, "Well, I'm actually leaving here. I'm going there." And I had some dear friends. There was a great drummer in my life, a guy named Tris Imboden, who was playing on all kinds of stuff. He was in the Kenny Loggins band. He played with Al Jarreau, who was a great jazz pop artist. He was playing on lots of records, and he had offered, "Come stay with me, come hang," but it was not a long-term, safety net.
Yeah.
This producer says, "Come to LA and you can stay in my house," and that was my sort of godsend, because I honestly did show up, and there was a period of time that was really hard because I didn't know anybody really out there. Well, I did, but it was, I realized the vastness. I knew people in Redondo Beach, and I was in the valley, and that's like, an hour and 20-minute drive away or whatever. So it was kind of like being alone. And but this guy kept saying, "Come," he was trying to plug me into stuff. And it still took me a while. It was definitely a lonely, harsh, hard, broke period of time, but thankfully I didn't have to go out and get a restaurant bartender. Everybody in LA always was like, "Hey, may I take your order?" "Oh, actually, I'm an actor. Actually, I'm a great guitar player. Actually, So I didn't ever have to take anybody's order. Thank God. These guys helped me, and over a year-long period, probably little this, little that, all of a sudden this guy, "Oh, well, do you want to come play on this? Or do you want to?" And I really did kind of fall into a studio, what I dreamt of, really a session career.
Okay, and you said that was in the early 80s, so so by the mid 80s you were doing more sessions, and you were more of like a session player at that point.
That's pretty much what I did for the most part. There was a few, there was another good friend, Keith Edwards, who was a dear friend, drummer who played with a bunch of people, and he was playing with Johnny Rivers. Johnny Rivers is a very successful 60s, 70s rock star, really. Johnny had records starting in 63, 64 when he was 17. He knocked the Beatles out of number one with, when they had "I Want to Hold Your Hand." And he had a song called "Memphis," and that was his kind of big entree, and he had many, many after that. But Keith offered me, Johnny would work some live stuff, and he offered me the gig because he was going out to do other things. And Johnny worked just enough to where you didn't really leave town but a couple of days a month. So I was doing that some. And there were a few other
live show type
live
stuff.
show stuff. Yeah, he was just out on tour doing concerts, always great, big festivals or cool stuff. And so I did that. And there were a few sometimes an artist, you would play on a record and they would be having some kind of LA showcase or something, and I would play sometimes live with them, but I truly didn't play much live music for 6 or 7 years.
Okay, so at a certain point, obviously, you formed the band Highway 101, which I'm assuming had been not far from the period we're talking about now.
It was at the end of it. The irony, Highway 101 was a group of people. I didn't know any of them. It was ironically the manager, who was an old friend from Colorado, who had been a major rock and roll promoter. Chuck Morris is his name. He still is and has been to this date, even really a major figure in the rock and roll business. But he was starting to manage some people, and he called me and asked if I would maybe be interested or help him oversee the forming of this band. He wanted somebody in it that he knew. And so I got asked just to kind of come see what it was. And to be honest, the original forms of it weren't even the same. There was 2 other people that were the same people that it wound up being. But yeah, so it was the late 80s.
And this was your first kind of like country band, correct?
Yeah.
Because you never played, and I don't really know how the market was then, but I'm sure country was kind of coming into its own at that point as far as being like a viable
it was
financial.
small. It was smaller anyway. There were still, Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson's, and that outlaw movement had happened. And that had made a pretty big mark even in the rock and roll world, but that was like 3 artists. It was still basically a Nashville-based, the music went everywhere, of course, but
right.
Merle Haggard's and, there were the West Coast people I knew more, Merle Haggard and Buck Owens and some of that I was aware of hearing as a kid. Mm-hmm. But it certainly wasn't anything in my vernacular in terms of what I played. And by the time I got to Los Angeles in the early 80s, it was the furthest thing from my mind. I didn't even consider it really. So when he called and said, "You want to help me put together a country band?" I'm like, well, no. But I know you're a good source. And I thought, well, maybe going to Nashville via this, because I did know other drummers that would make the trips. And I go, well, that'd be pretty cool to be able to go, oh, I'm going to Nashville to work on a record, and then still live in LA, of course. But
right.
Yeah, so I used it as thinking it was a vehicle for that.
Okay, and then so Highway 101 formed. You guys had commercial success, but you were still living in LA for a while that was going on. At what point did you decide, and kind of tell us the story about how you came to move to Nashville from being in LA, especially for over essentially a decade at this point?
And I honestly did. I loved Los Angeles. I loved my fantasy of being that guy, leaving the studio at 10 o'clock at night and you could smell the floral smell of LA. And it was just, I don't know, it was a pretty much, my dream come true life. And the band starting, one of the things I was going to say was Curtis, the bass player, and I, Curtis Stone, were just becoming kind of acquainted. And he called me and asked me to go work on a movie called Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield. And that movie gave us 7 days sitting in a trailer, just the 2 of us when we weren't on camera, which seemed like a couple hours out of a 12-hour day. Mm-hmm. And he was just going, dude, we got to do this band. And I was still going, I don't want to leave. I love what I do here. And ironically, Robert Downey Jr. was a baby startup actor, and he was in the trailer with us. He was assigned to us. And we'd be sitting there, and he was building balsa wood airplanes, and he'd go, dude, I think you should do this band. I think he's right. And I'm still going, oh, great, it's tag team. So yes, Highway, the selling point, and I think is.
So you're saying that Robert Downey Jr. is the reason why Highway 101 was
he's the
band.
reason that, little does he know that he is, he probably is a big part of the band. The one thing that Curtis said that was completely the right way to look at this was songwriting. I did view it as musician first, everything else second. When Curtis would talk about this, he'd go, it will be our own, we're calling the shots, we're not sitting waiting for the phone to ring. We can write songs for this, which is a whole other revenue stream, and it's a whole smart way to control your destiny. And so those things, in hindsight were, I'm very thankful that it happened because of learning more and starting to do that more. But yeah, so the band was very successful right off the bat. We won Group of the Year immediately, CMA Awards, ACM Awards 4 times back to back, number one song after number one song. Literally kind of thinking, oh, that's just what happens. You put a record out, goes to number one, and you go out and do one of the biggest tours of the year with whoever we opened for the biggest stars at that point in time. Kind of amazing the way it worked for us. But
which is, that's totally kind of like that. If you're the new kid on the block artist and you're having that initial success, it sounds pretty, I guess, stereotypical for kind of the run you would make would be, oh, you're the one who's going to be opening up for all these big artists now. But as a big artist, but you still, the time on tour and selling tickets is something that has to be earned and kind of proven as opposed to like, it just immediately happens.
It doesn't usually even, that reality that we lived was kind of false. It was because we had the right business team in place. We had Chuck, who was a big leverage piece of the puzzle in record companies and in the tour company business, so he knew all the agents. And so he just worked that. I mean, that was the greatest gift, really, was his insight. So when we first come out and Randy Travis is this huge artist, they go, oh, Chuck calls and gets us on that tour. Next year, he gets us on the George Strait tour. And in the middle of that, Hank Jr. dates. And then the following year, the Judds. I mean, we'd spend a whole year with some superstar and just kind of got spoiled. And we'd go out and do our own shows too. But yeah, it was kind of a false reality, truthfully.